Hi there, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Gazette's Hockey Inside Out Show. I'm Stu Cowan of the Gazette, and I'm joined by former Canadiens defenseman and assistant coach Rick Green, along with my Gazette colleague Brendan Kelly, who writes our What the Puck column, who's filling in for Chris Nyland. Rick, some shaky goaltending to start the season, especially from Samuel Montembeault. Several key injuries, but Canadiens at the midway point of the season still battling for first place in the Atlantic Division, in the top 10 in the overall NHL standings. Should Martin St. Louis be in contention for the Jack Adams Award as the NHL's top coach?
Well, I would like to think honorable mention, but a name that jumps out is Bednar in Colorado. For me, is right from the start of the season right through. They've lost 4 games. Dominant in so many areas. He's been there a long time. He's getting great results from each and every player that he works with. And, you know, he's a guy that I would like to think will be voted in as one of the go-to guys. But John Cooper, another name that I really like. John Cooper. He's never really won it, and he continues to find ways to always in the top, and a quality guy that deserves to be talked about. But
two outstanding coaches. What are your thoughts, Brendan?
Well, you know what? I think it's too early to say. I'm not sure I would put him in the top 3. I mean, famously, he got there last year, and I think that was really because it was so unexpected that the Canadiens got into the playoffs. The team is doing better this year. Is that because of Martin St. Louis? I'm not so sure. I mean, I think it's probably as much as anything, Lane Hudson and maybe Slavkovsky deserve credit for that better play. I mean, it's funny. I was watching an episode of The Rebuild last year. That one last night, the one where Martin is there with his dad and behind the scenes, and his dad's like, "Geez, your press conferences are longer than the other press conferences." And I think if there's ever an award for the best press conferences, it goes to Martin St. Louis. I mean, this guy is off the charts in terms of talking and coming up with aphorisms and funny and insightful ways of looking at things, coming off years of press conferences from Michel Therrien and Claude Julien where they were like sort of grumbling and barking, and we're actually way shorter. You know what Martin St. Louis does great? He brings the group together. There's no question about that, right? We're always talking about the unity of this group, and it was not united. Think back to the years when it was Subban versus Pacioretty, and there's cliques. He brings them together. The players love him. I would say, you know, the questions are more his in-game decisions, and it's, you know, there's some possible questioning of that. And I would say there's some questioning of what happened with the goaltenders, too. Was that, you know, he was really, you know, Martin St. Louis, it's funny because he's a new age coach in the way he talks, but in the way he coaches, he's very old school in a lot of ways, right? His mentor is John Tortorella, and it's all about the veterans, for example. So with Montembeault, it was like, Montembeault's number one. He's number one. He's got to be number one. And it's like, you know what? Was that the right thing to do? I mean, eventually they had to realize, no, we can't do that. So that might have cost them a few points. But listen, if they end up at the end of the year a couple of points out of first place in the conference in the division, I got to think Martin St. Louis is in the conversation.
I mean, he's a great hockey mind, obviously. Rick, he's a fantastic communicator. I mean, he did motivational speeches before he got the job coaching the Canadiens. You can see why. The news conferences you mentioned, Brendan, he's so good in them. He has time for the media. He gives thoughtful answers. And it's interesting because some of the French guys who covered him back when he was playing were saying he wasn't necessarily great with the media when he was a player, but I think in this job he understands how important it is. And you know, 2 press conferences a day on game days and speak with the media every day, and he handles it very, very well. You know, Rick, you played for a lot of coaches. You were an assistant coach for a lot of coaches, including Claude Julien with the Canadiens. What do you like? What impresses you most about Marty St. Louis?
I think just his way of communicating his messages, whether it be to players or to the media. I think he's very transparent. I think he's really tries to be as honest as he can be and tells it the way it is. And I think anybody that listens to him appreciates that. And you know, I think back to the day that Pat Burns was asked about, well, you're in the running for Coach of the Year, and he goes, I don't care about that. I just want to be coached for a year. Ultimately it ended up costing him. So it's not all it's cracked up to be. If you look at the track record,
Yeah.
some of those guys go from the penthouse to not the most prettiest scenario, but there are a lot of real special guys out there that are in that position, really tough position to try and keep everything together and deliver the messages and communication that's needed in today's game. And Martin St. Louis does a great job at it, and obviously the players respect him and appreciate and doing everything they can to allow him to represent success as a group.
Brendan, you mentioned that thing about his dad in that rebuild story. I mean, it's a great story, right? His dad's from a family of like 14 kids from a sawmill, like in the middle of nowhere in Quebec, and his son becomes a Hall of Fame player. And I know you've written some books about the history of the Canadiens, and that there's just like when you see that, what's like it's just I mean, I can't imagine your kid becomes a Hall of Fame player and becomes coach of the Canadiens. I remember asking Marty if his dad played hockey. He said no, his family had no money. Like maybe on the outdoor rink with his brothers, that was about it. But just a great story.
It really is. In passing, Martin St. Louis also one of the greatest players in the last 3 decades in the National Hockey League, and faced all kinds of adversity for his size and undrafted and all of that. But yeah, I love that moment. You see his dad, and he's a salt of the earth French Canadian guy.
I see him at all the games. I see him after almost every game, and he's just walking around. He's got his Canadiens ball cap on.
Yeah, loves it. But it's great. You see this expression on Marty's face, and he's looking at his dad because his dad's talking a little too much and saying, "Yeah, Dad, okay." But obviously the dad's so proud of St. Louis. And look, this guy is an amazing character, St. Louis. And it's funny, Rick's talking about, you go from the penthouse, I'd say penthouse to the outhouse, right? And it's like. The reality is, and even more so in the last couple of years, coaches are getting fired right, left, and center. And suddenly we kind of still think of Martin St. Louis as this newish coach. No, he's one of the most senior coaches in the league. And one of the things I really like about Martin St. Louis, he talks to the players during the game. It's like, it just used to drive me crazy. It would be the assistants. It'd be Rick that would have to talk to the players. The other guys who's sitting there with their arms crossed, he talks to them. He gets excited when they win, and he jumps up when they win in overtime. Remember when Mark Savard
beat up Stefan Robida one of these nights after a win?
It's fantastic. I love that. But at the same time, I remember last year, super funny. I go to the pub sometimes, McLean's, and talk to fans, and I was talking to them about, the beginning of last year was, had they turned the corner. And who walks into the bar? It's Martin St. Louis, and he just sat down beside me by chance. And so I told him, hey, I'm doing this, what the puck, and I'm talking to people. So I said, do you think you've turned the corner? Because they'd won a couple of games, but the fall of last year was very difficult. And he looked at me and he said, no, I don't think we've turned the corner. And I thought, that's Martin St. Louis in a nutshell, right? Like most every other coach would say, yeah, we've turned the corner, things are going great. But there's a kind of insight and honesty to the way he talks that I find so refreshing. There's John Cooper's another one, and he's super funny too. And he has insight, but so many coaches.
Cooper's a mentor for St. Louis also, and he played for him also. That's one of his coaching mentors. We were talking earlier about the news conferences. Rick, you weren't head coach of the Canadiens. You didn't have to deal with guys like me or Brendan after games, but you were in the coach's room before Claude Julien or Terry or whoever. What's it like, those 5 minutes? You always there's a break before the coach comes out to meet the media. What's it like in the coach's room before the head coach has to go out and face the media?
Well, I think that with the coverage that they get today, they have to be really careful about what they say. They're briefed. A lot of times they're briefed on what to expect. And then it's kind of go with the flow. And some guys are natural. Some guys are really good at it and make it seem effortlessly. And, Martin St. Louis seems to be one of those guys that just kind of spiels out what he feels and take it or leave it. But there's nothing hidden with him.
Yeah, that's a great quality for a head coach in today's NHL. Anyway, that's it for this bonus episode. We'll be back with our weekly Hockey Inside Out show on Wednesday, followed by 3 more bonus episodes. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Hockey Inside Out YouTube channel. And if you didn't already know, Hockey Inside Out is now available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.